Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions for both Governors Jefferson and Cook on the diversity of our financial institution. Competition is the bedrock of the American experiment, and the diversity of our banking system has been a core tenet of the prosperity that our nation has experienced. Today, we have about 4,000 banks, a figure that has been on the decline for the last couple decades. While it is important to recognize that large financial institutions serve a valuable purpose, we must also ensure that small financial institutions are allowed to prosper and persevere to serve their communities. I'm a big believer that community banks are where you find that community relationship that allows for folks to have a relationship that lets them get a loan for start a small business or mortgages. That relationship becomes really important. And too often, new regulations increasingly result in compliance burdens, which prevent many of these institutions from being profitable, and they often cannot compete on an even footing with the larger institutions who employ thousands of employees, it seems, just to meet the financial and federal regulations. Given your roles will involve the oversight of all of our nation's banks, how will you commit to ensuring the continued diversity of our financial system, and maybe more pointedly or specifically, the one-size-fits-all, is that your view of how we should regulate our banks, or is a more tailored approach being necessary?
You want to go first? Thank you, Governor. I'm sorry. Thank you, Senator Scott, for your question. And let me affirm the perspective that the diversity of the banking system is really one of the strengths of the American economy. It's very much the case that the role of community banks often is vital for the communities in which they exist because of that personal, what we call relationship banking, which is the key to access for many small businesses who are just starting out. My view with respect to regulation is that regulation should be set at a level that's consistent with the level of risk of the institution, okay? Necessarily, community banks are less complex than the large banking organizations in our economy, and therefore the regulatory burden should be substantially less than what we see in with respect to the large organizations. What we want is confidence in our banking system by depositors and businesses. And so finding the right level of regulation to make sure that our community banks are safe and sound is the key to that confidence, and what will allow them to continue to provide the vital function that, that you have articulated so well. So I do believe in a measured, tailored approach to regulation.
Thank you very much. Governor?
I would agree with Governor Jefferson, and I'd just like to add a few things. I have, like you, I'm very interested in the diversity of the sizes of institutions in the financial system. As you know, I've served on the board of SCDFI, and I was elected by community banks to serve on the board of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. So I completely understand relationship banking as you're discussing, and how deeply rooted community banks are in their communities, and how they serve entrepreneurs, businesses, and the people, households in those communities. And I agree with tailoring, that they should not have to be burdened by the same requirements that large banks are. And that they should be able to thrive in these communities without the burden of significant regulation. So I agree with you. There's been a secular decline for 30 years in the number of community banks, and I think it's a serious issue. But I think the diversity of the banking system, the sizes especially, is a strength of the U.S. banking system.
Thank you. Now, running out of time, so I'm going to ask, unfortunately, the two of you one more question as relates to the Governor Barr, or Vice Chair Barr, has indicated that he wants a higher capital standard as it relates to how much capital is kept on the sidelines. I think that may ultimately end up punishing small businesses and the relationship with the banks. So the more capital we require on the sidelines as a result of SVB or Signature Bank, which I think would be a mistake, it leaves fewer dollars to be loaned out. I'd love to hear your perspective on higher capital standards, specifically as it relates to the failures that we've just experienced, which I think is more of a liquidity issue than a capital standard.
As I indicated in my response to Chairman Brown, these liquidity issues and interest rate issues that you mentioned, Senator, were quite significant in the bank stress episode that we experienced in March. Now, with respect to capital requirements, that is something that I know Vice Chair Barr is in the process of evaluating. My personal view is that we want a banking system that is sound and resilient so that banks are able to lend throughout the cycle. So as we think about capital requirements, we are always, or I will always be thinking about that trade-off between making banks more resilient and sound and credit availability, right? See, we don't want to prohibit the banks from doing their vital role in the economy, which is allocating credit, and they're the ones who assess entrepreneurs to see what businesses they want to fund. And that's a vital role, and we never want to curtail that. So I think we have to deal with, always grapple with, the trade-offs between those two things in setting the right level of capital.
Thank you. Anything you want to add to that, ma'am?
I'll just add that I think about this like an economist would in terms of the objective function. What's the objective? To have more resilience in the financial system. But I'm aware of the constraints as well, the other considerations, and that includes possibly not having enough capital to, enough credit to lend out to businesses. So we take into account holistically both the objective of resilience and the constraints associated with obtaining that resilience. And like you, I am interested in the diversity of the banking system, so that's a strength. I wouldn't want small community banks to be burdened with the regulation that we see for larger institutions. And I think that there are many, as a result of, getting back to your question of SBV, there are proposals that are being developed, and I look forward to seeing those and reviewing those proposals as you put them forward.
Thank you, Governor Cook. Senator Smith.